Gama responded to you in any way? Responded to that email of yours in any way?
I had no email correspondence from him whatsoever.
Telephone call?
Yes, I had a SMS message from Mr. Gama, and
Yes.
this is covered on, if I may just jump to that, Council,
Yes.
Yes.
in answer
sir.
to that. Thank you. If I could take you through to 54, please, on page 13, paragraph 54.
Yes.
And I received an SMS from Mr. Gama in response to my email of the 23rd, and his email stating, "I have just seen your email. I will explain to you the GCE's thinking." And that was it. This was not followed up. I took note of the email, sorry, of the SMS, left it at that. But the observation which I make from that is his comment, Mr. Gama's comment that I have just seen your email.
Cannot be true.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Because on the same day that he received it, he sent an email to Mr. Singh about it.
The exact point of 54.1. Thank you.
Okay.
And in the sequence of events, that SMS you referred to at paragraph 54 comes on the 4th of February.
Yes.
And a lot happened between the 23rd of May, which is when you generated the email, and the SMS received on the 4th of February.
In that intervening time, on the 24th of May, we had the BADC meeting and the board meeting, which effectively, no, which not effectively, but which approved the memorandum and the confinement of the locomotives to CSR. But I think that you will be
We'll
covered
deal
in a
with
moment.
it right now. Thank you. And in fact, the BADC meeting of the 24th, which if we could recollect, when Mr. Gama asked you to make certain changes to the proposal to increase the number of diesel locomotives from 60 to 80, he indicated in that email that presentation was scheduled for the 24th of January 2014 before BADC, and that's the date we are all trying to beat, correct?
Sorry if I recollect your question correctly, his SMS to me on the Friday afternoon of the 18th was, we had to meet the BADC meeting of Friday the 24th.
Yes, sorry, it's of the 18th of January. So we're all trying to beat the BADC meeting of the 24th.
Correct.
And you deal with that BADC meeting at your paragraph 49, at page
Yes.
12.
Yeah.
Okay.
May I?
You may proceed, please.
The BADC meeting was held on the 24th of January, and Annexure 13, and I record that the minutes of this was provided to me by the Zondo Commission. The minutes of the BADC meeting on the 24th of January, Annexure 13, if we may just turn to that, please, which is page
227.
227. The minutes themselves are on 228.
Yes.
From 2 to 8, I note from these meetings that per 1.4 of 2 to 8, that in partial attendance was Mr. S.I. Gama, Mr. T. Gianni, and in full attendance was under 1.2, Mr. Malefi and Mr. Singh were in attendance at that meeting.
And Mr. Gary Peter on 1.2.
Gary Peter
the
was...
G. Peter, there is that Mr. Gary Peter.
That Mr. G. Peter is, yes, Mr. Gary Peter, Group Supply Chain Officer.
And then while we are still then dealing with the composition of that committee, we understand Mr. Sharma was the chairperson?
Per the minutes, yes.
Yes. And the third name listed there, Mr. M.E. Mkwanazi, is listed as a member. Do you know who was Mr. M.E. Mkwanazi?
The only Mr. M.E. Mkwanazi that I know of that name that would have been at this meeting was Mr. Mafika Mkwanazi, who was the chairman of the board.
Okay. Okay, now you brought us then to Annexure 13.
Yes. The point then beyond this is if one then goes to page 232 of those minutes, where they discuss the acquisition of the 100 class 19E electric and 60 class 43 diesel locomotives under paragraph 5.2 of page 232.
Yes. And what in particular would you like to draw the chair's attention to at 5.2?
Well, the first thing I'd like to draw attention to is that despite the attendance of those three parties who were fully aware now of the concerns which I had expressed, those concerns were not reflected in the minutes of the BADC meeting
I'm
at
sorry,
all.
Mr. Collett. I can see 5.1.2, but I think you are talking about, you are dealing with 5.2. What page is that?
232, Chair.
232.
232.
232.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Going through the paragraphs, 521 is administrative. They took them through that. Paragraph 522 at the bottom of that page is the discussion that took place around the procurement. The point around that discussion is that nowhere in that discussion were the concerns that I raised brought to the attention of the meeting as a potential risk to this transaction by any of the parties present who had full knowledge now of those risks which I had raised.
Now,
do we know whether prior to this meeting, the documentation that the board committee had received in relation to this issue included the amended memo, and whether it was a memo that contained the same changes that we have dealt with, or whether there were any further changes arising out of your concerns?
Right. The memo that was presented to the board, Mr. Chair, is Annexure 14, page 244.
Yes.
And if we turn to page 267, which is the signatures of that memorandum recommending confinement to CSR, we will see or note that it is signed by Mr. Anosh Singh on the 21st, sorry, on the 14th of the, correction, on the 21st of 01/14, i.e. that would be the 21st of January. It is signed by Mr. Malefi, dated the 21st of January. What is interesting about these signatures is the 21st of January was the Monday of the week before.
That was before your email of your concerns.
Before the email of my concerns, before this memorandum had even been finalized.
Yes.
It predates the finalization of that email. The email...
No, I'm not sure if I understand that. Your email to Mr. Gama and Mr. Gianne, in which you expressed your concerns about amendments to the memo you had compiled, was sent on the 23rd, isn't it?
Was sent on the 23rd, yes.
Yes, which it would be a day after Mr. Brian Mlefe had signed this one, and 2 days after Mr. Singh had signed this memo at page 267.
May I take you back, Mr. Chair? The revised the memorandum I prepared on the Monday recommended confinement to Mars. On the 21st, I recommended confinement to Mars.
Monday being the 21st?
Monday the 21st.
Yes.
if I may correct us, I apologize, Chair. I think it's Monday the 20th.
Sorry, Monday the 20th.
Yes.
Okay.
Monday the 20th.
Yes.
The Wednesday, the 22nd, the morning of Wednesday the 22nd, I get this revised memorandum from Mr. Ndewe Metshetle.
Yes.
Where we are still then busy revising the memorandum and putting the document in. And I only send that document to her later on the Wednesday morning.
Yes, yes,
So this document could not have been ready
yes.
for signature on the 21st or the 22nd because it was still in
Yes.
preparation, is the
Yes.
point I was making.
That is now assuming that this document reflects the changes that you were asked to make.
It does indeed.
And you say it does?
It does.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And maybe to go back to the point which was the subject of my original question, this document, therefore, being the document that was placed before the board committee, in substance, did it contain the same amendments about which you had expressed concern?
It contains
substance.
the same amendments in substance, confinement to Mars for the same reasons.
Okay, okay, thank you. Okay,
Chair, if I may just check with Mr. Khalad, I'm not sure if he understood your question.
Yes.
The Chair's question was whether the document, which is annexed as 14,
Yes.
contained the amendments made to the original proposed mass confinement.
maybe let me put it again. Mr. Kalat, you were sent by Ms. Mdleche
Yes.
your memo that you had prepared, but with suggested changes.
Correct.
Or changes that you were asked to make. And you had concerns about the changes that you were asked to make.
Correct.
You sent an email to Mr. Gama and Mr. Gianni about your concerns.
Correct.
So my question in regard to this was simply whether, in substance, this document that was placed before the board committee contained the same changes which had caused you the concerns which you had articulated to Mr. Gama and Mr. Gianni. And my understanding is that you say that is so.
Absolutely correct, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
It contains the same changes in substance to which
Yes.
I raised my concerns
Yes.
to Mr. Gianni
Yes.
and Mr. Singh.
Yes.
And without testifying to every dot and T, but it is essentially the changes that I received from Mr. Ndiwe Mdleche in that mail to which I expressed my concerns.
Yes, okay.
Thank you, Chair. And perhaps because we are already on this document, it might be appropriate to deal with it at this juncture. Mr. Khalad, if you refer to page 257 of your statement,
2-5.
7, and starting at paragraph 69,
Yes.
and up,
I'm sorry, Ms. Silo. Earlier on, you made the point, Mr. Khaled, that I think it was Mr. Brian, Mr. Singh. The page on which he signed the document we have just been talking about that was placed before the board committee, it appears to have been signed on the 21st of January 2014. And I think it was in regard to him that you were saying the document could not have been signed on the 21st because on the 21st he would not, I assume you say, have received the document as amended by, as given effect to the amendments having been given effect to by you that were suggested to you.
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, the amended document
The amended document, yes.
came later.
Yes.
So the question I wanted to ask was whether it was not possible that it would not have been possible for somebody not to wait for you to effect the changes, but to go ahead and make the changes on their own computer.
Of course, that possibility does exist, and it is a possibility, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Someone else could have
Yes.
made all those changes without waiting for me,
Yes.
given them to Mr. Singh and Mr. Molefe to
Yes,
sign
yes.
on the 21st,
Yes,
which would have meant that the mail from Ms. Molefe to me on the 22nd
Yes.
was a waste of time
Academic,
or
yeah.
just a total miscommunication.
yes.
I cannot
Yes.
say that
So
that is
if,
not
if,
possible.
Yeah, if that, if that was done, then it's possible, but if they waited for your ones, then it would not be possible.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And let us take that discussion to its logical conclusion, Mr. Callard, if you permit me. Please refer to page 260. And that is the signed proposal to Vedok.
Yes.
At 87, just a second.
Yes.
At page 87, what is that table and how did it get to be part of this document?
I'm sorry, didn't you say we must go to 260?
So paragraph 87, I do apologize,
Oh,
Chair.
not page.
Page
Okay.
260,
Yes.
paragraph 87. At paragraph 87, there is a table.
There is a table, yes.
Do you know who inserted that table into the document?
To the best of my recollection, that I did that, but I would just like to confirm that to the document which I received from Ms. Molefe, which I think is Annexure 13, Annexure
Annexure 5, I think.
Annexure 5,
No, sorry, let me not confuse you. We are looking for Annexure 7, which starts at 157.
Annexure 7,
And Annexure 7 itself is the email from Ms. Molefe
Molefe, yes.
requesting you to find the evaluation methodology that needs to be incorporated in the Word document.
Right. If one could, thank you, and if I could refer you please to page 177 and 178.
Yes?
Yes,
This is the document received from Ms. Molefe on the Wednesday morning, and you will see significant gaps on page 177 and 178 where the document obviously needs to be formulated and a slide inserted. And that is what happened when I inserted the evaluation methodology slide into the document. It was fine-tuned.
so by reason of that, you are able to say the document that Mr. Singh and Mr. Brian Molefe signed, that which I referred to a few minutes ago, you are able to say it is the document that came from you after you had been asked to effect changes.
And yes, unless, one cannot exclude the possibility that there was somebody else with all the knowledge who
Yeah.
did it on the side. One
Yes.
cannot exclude that possibility, but otherwise it's
But you say on the probabilities.
on the balance of probabilities.
Yeah, okay.
May I then also just direct one to the final point that if one looks at on page 260, right at the bottom left, it says Vedok 160 final. So even after my document was inserted, there were still subsequent changes to this because it has now been changed from version 15 GP, which I amended, to somebody has still worked on it, to Vedok 160 final.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And to the question whether or not this document reflected the concerns you had raised about confinement to CSR, the document at Annexure 14.
Well, maybe if you say reflects the concerns, it might be ambiguous.
No. In fact, I'll restate.
It reflects the issues that gave rise to his concerns.
It's a completely wrong question I posed. It reflects the changes made to your original document.
In substance,
That is the question.
yes.
And in that regard, I would like to refer you to page 256.
Yes.
And I just lost my page. Chair, if you'd bear with me. And with reference to our Annexure 8, page 256 from paragraph 66.
25 from paragraph 60.
Have you located it?
I have 256 paragraph 66
From paragraph 66?
on page 256.
Yes.
Yes?
A comparison of from paragraph 68, confinement of 100 electric locomotives, with your Annexure 8, which is where you indicated changes were made, and that will be on page 199, appear to be the same, meaning that the latter document seems to have incorporated the very CSR changes introduced. Would I be correct?
That would be correct. If we look at paragraph 69, that is at the first reading the same as paragraph 67. Paragraph 68, addressing the urgency, is missing from the approved version. The paragraph 670, complementing the urgency, is in, and it is same in style and substance as the page 201, which was the change document I received from Ms. Smith-Lecce. So, confirming in substance, it is the same.
At least insofar as confinement to CSR is
Confining
concerned.
to CSR, yes.
You will recall, Mr. Callard, that we were dealing with the actual minute of Vedok
Yes.
before we dealt with these issues. And we were at page 232.
232.
And in particular, item 5.2.2.
232?
2.2, 5.2.
No, the annexure, the minutes.
Annexure would be, Chair.
I thought you were saying we were
30.
going there.
Chair?
I thought you were saying we were going to the minutes.
Yes, the minutes start at, it's Annexure 13, starting at 227.
Okay.
And the particular page is page 232. And you were at paragraph 5.2.2 on
Thank you.
page. Now, I'm going to try and deconstruct this, and I would like to have your comments. The first entry there states, management, and I quote, management informed the committee that it was decided that a 26 heavy haul line by GE would perform better than a Class 19E locomotive by Mitsui. Just, can you comment on that
Certainly. Consistent.
in regard to GE, please? Reference to GE?
Consistent throughout this paragraph, GE should read CSR, and CSR should read GE, consistent throughout this approval of the 100 locomotives.
So you're saying they got mixed up?
They got mixed
They got
up.
swapped around there.
They got mixed up.
Okay, then if we will read GE for purposes of this
Yes,
conversation,
no, we
as
must
CSR
read
for now.
as it is, yeah.
Yes. It says management informed the committee that it was decided that a 26 heavy haul line by, you suggest CSR would perform better than a Class 19E locomotive by Mitsui. My question to you is, do you know who and by whom it was decided that that 26-ton heavy haul line by CSR would perform better than the 19E Mitsui?
I cannot put a name to when you ask by whom.
And you say this GE, where it says GE in that sentence and in the rest of that paragraph, it should be saying CSR.
Correct, Mr.
And
Chair.
where it says CSR, it should say GE.
Correct, yes.
And on that very point, before I deal with the other issues, if you go further into the body of that paragraph, Mr. Callard, at line 6. At the end of line 5, a statement starts, quote, management requested for a contract extension for class 43E diesel locomotives by CSR,
Which
end of quote.
should read an extension for class 43 diesel locomotives by GE. That's what it should read.
And so the diesel locomotives were to be supplied by GE,
Correct.
and the electric locomotives by CSR.
Correct.
But when you say, when you read that paragraph, there is an inversion there. There's a bit of a confusion. So where we see GE, we must read CSR, and conversely, where we see CSR, we must read GE.
Correct.
Okay. Getting back then to the start of the document, the second proposition made here is, and it stated, quote, further, it seemed that CSR, written GE, I'll read CSR, delivers faster than Mitsui. Do you have a comment on that?
Yes, I have a comment. The comment is correct, but one questions its relevance. Because CSR, and it was known at the time, is a major supplier of locomotives in China, and they have the capacity, it was passage talk, that they could produce 1,000 locomotives a year. That is a considerable number of locomotives. So they have the capacity to produce. The relevance, however, is that they are then produced in China and not in South Africa, and then would not meet any of the local supplier development and or local content prescriptions which would be in place for the import of the locomotives. So to make the statement that CSR can produce locomotives at that rate, however in China, when it should be applied to South Africa, is questionable. Further, at this time, no locomotive from CSR had been produced in South Africa. The production line in Transnet Engineering was still being set up. We have heard, and I've spoken to, the one locomotive that was imported from China and undergoing prototype testing. The first 10 locomotives of that 95 were coming from China. Nothing had been developed here in South Africa. So then to posit that we could have a rapid production line here in South Africa when it had not even been set up was a false statement. This statement that they could produce 100 locomotives, but in China, I contend it's designed to confuse and mislead.
Would it make sense what they were saying about in terms of local skills development if the locomotives, if they were not doing it in South Africa, or it could make sense depending on certain things? You said you question. You said it's questionable, and I'm just trying to see whether that's as far as you can take it.
I make an inference, and I stress that it is an inference. The members of the board generally are not familiar with locomotive procurement and locomotive supply, and would take statements from management at face value as being these are true and correct, and give a full and true picture of where we should be taking the organization and doing. If a statement is made in this context to a board which is not informed of the detail or knowledgeable of the detail around locomotive supply, the first inference that the board would make, well, thank you, this is kosher, unless they knew different. There is a fiduciary duty on management to inform the board of all relevant risks to our transaction in a enterprise such as Transnet. 2 points arise from here. One, the board or Vedok in this case, was not informed of the significant risks to which members now were already alerted. So there was a failure of I contend, a serious failure of fiduciary duty at that level. The second, in what was put forward here as a rationale for confining to China in the fact that they could deliver, was misleading in that the board would not have known or been able to realize that this was China and not South Africa.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Khaled. The next issue is also still at 522. And it states, I read from the third line, that would be the third sentence on the third line, and I quote, management motivated for the confinement in favor of GE, we know to read that as CSR now. This was motivated by a submission that was previously withdrawn due to reputational risk issues that had emanated from an old newspaper article. My question to you is, are you aware of a submission motivating for confinement to CSR that was withdrawn?
I know of no motivation to no submission that motivated a confinement to CSR that was withdrawn. The one which we do know of is the motivation which recommended a confinement to Mitsui in October that was withdrawn.
Okay.
And
so if we read that paragraph further, then skipping a line and going on to the next sentence, I read, the chairperson stated that the previous submission was withdrawn prior to the commencement of the 27 October 2013 meeting due to concerns that the confinement was proposed for Class 19E locomotives from Mitsui, open bracket, which had won a contract in 2006, close bracket, close, end of quote. It's a point that you make, that the one you know that was withdrawn was confining to Mitsui.
correct.
So that the one that was confining to Mitsui cannot be the one previously referred to as having been withdrawn. That would be a second one because that confines to CSR. The only one you know is the one confining to Mitsui.
The only one I know of is the one confined to Mitsui, yes.
Then it continues, and again I read, quote, the company extended the contract of 15E locomotives in 2010 and again confined to the same supplier. Media raised concern that the company had approved 2 confinements since the 2006 contract award. However, the company had never confined to CSR, therefore there should be no adverse publicity. And I'll stop there. Do you have a comment to that motivation for confinement to CSR?
My only comment is that it's an unusual reason for confining to a firm on the basis of publicity. If the reasons are sound and cogent, then one can deal with the publicity. If the reasons are not sound and cogent, one cannot deal with the publicity, is the only comment I can make to that.
Thank you. If we then continue on, it concludes by stating the proposed confinement was in compliance to the provisions of the approved procurement procedure manual. I won't ask for your comment at this juncture. I would like you to comment on a further statement at last line of 232. The statement that starts, assurance was given to the committee that the confinement process was audited by TIA. Can you, end of quote. What is TIA?
Transnet internal audit.
Have you had sight of the audit by TIA?
Yes, I have, and I believe that is annexure. That is,
Mr. Khaled, while you search, let's look at 232. And I'll remind you with reference to another document.
Right.
It says, assurance was given to the committee that the confinement process was audited by TIA. Have you ever seen a report by TIA regarding its audit of the confinement process?
I have no sight of, had no sight of, am unaware of any report, I stress the word report, by TIA on the confinement process, and I use the word process deliberately.
Now,
You said earlier on that wherever CSR appears in that paragraph, namely 5.2.2, which should read GE, does that apply also to the sentence towards the end of paragraph 232 that says, however, the company has never confined to CSR? Was that one also intended to be GE, that's CSR?
Mr. Chairman, in my reading of this and reading of this paragraph, I believe CSR is there used in the correct context.
In its correct context?
In its correct context,
okay.
Because the company had not previously confined to
yes.
CSR. The 95 locomotives previously referred to had been one on open tender. There had been no confinement to CSR.
Yes.
So
yes.
I believe in that instance, it is
yeah.
in its correct context.
Okay, but for the rest, incorrectly. Okay.
And the subsequent one, if I may, on the third line, CSR had the capacity to produce 5 locomotives a day, quote unquote, is also in its correct context of CSR.
Yes, okay.
And taking that sentence further, that is where you say there was a claim that it can produce, or it says it can therefore produce 100 locomotives for the company within a short
space of time, yes, but that is in China.
In China. You say, you indicated that you have never seen this report by internal audit, auditing the confinement process?
No.
As stated here. Please refer to your supplementary bundle, BB4, bracket C, the small bundle in the folder. And in particular, I would like to refer you to page 2 of that, paragraph 6. At paragraph 6 of your supplementary statement, you seek to introduce a further document to your statement.
Correct.
And this you have marked Annexure 13A.
Yes.
And Chair, that document, 13A, is to be found at page 8 of the supplementary statement. Now, having regard to what you stated, paragraph 6.1 of your supplementary affidavit, please explain to the Chair what this document that is proposed be marked Annexure 13A is.
Annexure 13A is an email from Andre Botha from Transnet Internal Audit. I do not know his then designation. Suffice that the mail and all the contents leave no doubt that he is from Transnet Internal Audit. And it is to Anosh Singh with a copy to Gary Peter. And the substance of this is, "Hi Anosh," and I quote, "As per discussion and upon review of the memo to Vedok on the procurement, requesting procurement of an additional 100 electric and 43 diesel locomotives, my comments are as follows." It's not the comments I wish to necessarily deal with because they are quite mundane. The point which I wish to draw attention to is as per my discussion and review of the memo to Vedok. That is to say that this TIA approval is limited to a reading of the memorandum in its own right, without reference to any of the background context of the changes and or processes which it followed. So it is a review of the memo, yet in the minutes it is given, stated as assurance was given to the committee that the confinement process was audited by TIA. And a review of the memo to an audit of the confinement process, I contend, are two entirely separate matters.
And at page 2 then, of your supplementary statement in paragraph 6, you conclude with a statement, "This is the only document that I could locate relating to the role played by Transnet internal audit in the acquisition of the 100 electric and diesel locomotives before the acquisition was approved by BADC." You say that?
Correct, yes.
But you will not go so far as to say that there is no report of the audit of the confinement process itself.
I confirm I have not seen, heard, nor found a report.
So maybe some other witness might guide us to such a report.
Indeed, they may do so. Indeed, they may do so.
Thank you. Let's look then, Mr. Callard, at page 233. And I would like to get your comment on the actual resolutions of the BADC, and that are reflected from paragraph 5.2.4. If you could just comment, if you just consider them and then comment if you please. Sorry, insofar, if I may just add, as the acquisition of the 100 locomotives is concerned.
Well, it is clear that this resolution gives effect to this memorandum to proceed with the confinement or the procurement of the 100 locomotives through a confinement process to CSR, and particularly in subparagraph G, quote, recommended that the board delegates authority to the group chief executive to sign and conclude all relevant documents to give effect to the resolution, including the award and process approval.
And as far as that is concerned, the last part of G, including the award and process approval, we know was introduced into your draft by whoever amended your draft. We dealt with that earlier.
Yes, yes.
I'm particularly interested in the nature of the resolution. If I read B, I read that the committee resolved, yes, recommended that the board approves the investment in and procurement of 100 electric locomotives required for the coal export line, estimated at 3.8 billion, in brackets excluding borrowing costs. Would I be interpreting this correctly if I say my understanding is what was approved as the procurement of locomotives, the size and specification of which is not provided for or prescribed?
Correct.
At a cost of 3.8 billion.
Yes, and the phrase one would use there, it is not in here, but the phrase which would be commonly used with this, it is used in the memorandum extensively, at a total estimated cost, and we abbreviate that in many documents to ETC. The importance of that phrase, is that that is the total cost to the organization over the lifespan of the project, the total estimated cost. The one exception to that is that it excludes the borrowing cost. If we have to raise money, it excludes the borrowing costs of raising that amount. But otherwise, it's inflation, forex, escalation, everything to have the product in its final entity.
And secondly, the committee, I'll rephrase, whereas your original memo sought approval for confinement to Mitsui for the acquisition of 19E electric type equivalent.
19E type equivalent locomotives.
What the board approved was purchase of 100 electric non-specific electric locomotives. So on the basis of this resolution, one could have bought a 20E or any other series that is available. The committee had approved that.
It is not specific in the type of locomotive. It could have been any electric locomotive.
Thank you. That then has taken us, I think, to your paragraph 53 at page 113. You have dealt with all those matters. So now we know that as at the 24th of January 2014, Vedok had approved the purchase of the 100 electric locomotives at a cost of 3.8 billion. Did you become aware of that decision of Vedok, and if so, when?
Maybe before that. Do the minutes reflect in any way, Mr. Callard, that the concerns that you had raised with Mr. Gama and Mr. Gianni about this were conveyed to the board committee at that meeting in one way or another, in substance?
I have no way of knowing whether they were conveyed in any form whatsoever. If they were, it would have been unusual, but the minutes of the meeting dealing with the procurement and approval for the 100 do not reflect the risks and concerns I raised on the potential implications of that transaction. They are not in item 5.22, and they are not elsewhere in these minutes.
Yes, no, I was particularly confining you to the minutes because the minutes are signed by the chairperson and the secretary at the end, and therefore must be taken to be, as far as the board is concerned at least, the board committee must be taken to be a correct reflection
Yes.
of the matters discussed and the issues discussed at the meeting. So you say, as far as you have gone through the minutes, you have not picked up anything that suggests that the board committee was alerted to the concerns that you had raised, with or without mentioning your name.
That is correct, Mr. Chair. I find nothing in these minutes relating to the concerns raised.
Yes, okay.
Thank you. And correct me if I am wrong, Mr. Callard, but the BADC would in turn then make recommendations to the full board. Is that how the system worked?
Depending on the level of the delegation of authority and the value of the transaction concerned, they would make recommendation to the full board. Yes, so this should go to it's my understanding that this would go to the board as per the first sentence in 5.9.7 and further agreed, and further submitted to the board for information purposes. This implies that Vedok is taking the decision. It's my understanding that this is outside of Vedok's delegated authority.
But when you read the minutes, what is reflected is that the BATC, their attitude was that the main board would only receive these minutes just for information only, not to make any decisions, because they would have made the decision themselves.
That is my reading of this paragraph, yes.
Let's try and be precise, Mr. Callard. Let's go back to 524, because my reading is slightly different. At 524 at page 233, and it reads, resolved that the committee, and at B, recommends that the board approves the investment.
My apologies.
That would imply that board approval was still required.
My apologies. I was reading the total cost of ownership. You
Yes.
are correct. I retract. It is correct. G is correct.
Okay. So all these resolutions would then be put before the board for the board to approve.
Correct.
But we know from the email that Mr. Gama sent to Mr. Singh on the 23rd of January, if I recall correctly,
Yes.
that after reading your concerns in your email, Mr. Gama thought that what you had been asked to effect through your memo made the whole memo to be a mess.
Correct.
That's the term he used.
Yes.
Now, if in substance the document that was placed before the BATC, the board committee that dealt with this issue, if the memo that was placed before them incorporated in essence the same issues which had caused you to be concerned in the way you indicated to Mr. Gama and to Mr. Chairman, then one would be entitled to say, using Mr. Gama's own words, therefore, what was put before that committee was a mess.
I agree.
And one would have thought that he would not have wanted a memo that was a mess to be placed before the board committee, and that it would have been amended appropriately so that what was put before the board committee would be a proper thing, a proper document.
I concur, yes.
Because what was placed before the board committee could influence the committee whether it recommended or did not recommend what it was asked to recommend.
Indeed so.
Yes.
In that sense, the information which the committee is given or the committee makes its decision on is, by and large, and with rare exception, it is bounded by the information contained in the memorandum. If the information in the memorandum is incomplete and or misleading, and the committee has no frame of reference with which to challenge that information, it can only make its decision on the information contained in the memorandum in the belief that what is contained in the memorandum is true and correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Now that we've established that the decision or resolutions and of the BADC must be presented to the board, are you aware whether or not the board had occasion to deal with these recommendations?
I have not personally seen and followed up on the minutes of that board meeting. I have to believe that it was given effect to, because we know that the necessary authorizations and warrants and went forward to procure the 100 locomotives from CSR. So I trust at the moment that it went through the board, but I have not seen the board minutes dealing with this one. I can only have only referenced the Vedok minutes.
You haven't had access to anything that may have been sent to the full board in any way after this meeting of this committee that you can remember?
I have seen and have had access to the board agendas, the
Yes.
agenda and sometimes the individual submissions to the board.
Yes.
But the actual minutes of the board meeting themselves, the board meeting itself that dealt with this item, no, I have not seen or had access to.
Yes. Going back to that paragraph with which we dealt quite at some length earlier on, in the minutes of that meeting of this board committee, where you said references to GE women should have been to CSR. I take it that the people who spoke to this issue at the at this meeting of this board committee could not have spoken like that, or it's unlikely they could have spoken like that, because they must have known what is CSR and what's GE, and that maybe there might just have been a mistake in the person who prepared the minutes. Would it be fair to say that?
I believe that to be the case, Mr. Chairman. I'm not.
Yeah.
I have seen a correction to the minutes later.
You have
a subsequent one, which did reflect this correction. I have not included it, but I.
Oh, you have seen it.
Yes,
yeah.
I have.
Okay.
I do recall
Yes.
and firmly believe that correction
Yes,
exists.
yes. So the people who may have been confused wouldn't have been the people who spoke to the issue at the meeting. It would have been the compiler of the
Correct.
minutes. Yeah.
Yes, I believe that to be
Yes.
the case. I firmly believe that to be the
Okay.
case.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We move on then to a matter we had already touched on before, I think, the lunch break, at your paragraph 54, which is the first response by Mr. Gama to your email of 23rd January 2014, and we are now at page 13. You deal with this at paragraph 54. And you had indicated that that is the only communication you received in response.
Yes.
And you make the statement, this was not followed up. Are you suggesting it was not followed up by neither by yourself nor Mr. Gama?
Neither. Received the SMS, read it, thank you, filed, and moved on.
At this point, were you aware that Mr. Gama had communicated your concerns to Mr. Singh?
No. I only became aware of these emails shortly around the time of preparing my statement.
The GCE at that time, was it Mr. Brian Molefe?
Group Chief Executive, yes.
Yes, because in his SMS to you, Mr. Gama says he would explain to you the GCE's thinking. Now that suggests to me, and I just want to find out whether you also have the same thinking, that suggests to me that what he is saying is that these changes that you were asked to effect to your memo, about which you expressed concern to him and to Mr. Gianni in your email of the 23rd of January, the person who knows about the thinking, what the thinking behind them was the GCE. That's the meaning I attach to this. Do you attach the same meaning?
I attach the same meaning.
Yes.
Yes.
So if that interpretation is correct, maybe we are getting for the first time that the person who may have decided, we don't know whether he decided, but the person who may have decided that there should be these changes may have been the GCE, but certainly we are told he knows the thinking behind them.
I concur with your interpretation from the reading of this SMS.
We just don't know whether
Yeah.
he made the decision.
I make a retrospective connection of dots to the withdrawal of the memo on the October to Mitsui, when it had gone through the full process and was withdrawn by the Group Chief Executive. I just make that connection, but I
Thank
can
you.
do no more.
Okay.
And on that score, have you ever had opportunity to discuss with Mr. Singh the concerns that you had expressed in the email to Mr. Gama on 23rd January 2014?
No, I never followed it up with Mr. Singh because I did not know of Mr. Gama's email to Mr. Singh. So I assumed at the time that it had died with Mr. Gianni and Mr. Gama.
At the time?
At the time, that was the context within which I operated. to discover later that in fact it had gone much further.
We are now on the 18th of February 2014 at your paragraph 55. Can you take us from that point?
Recalling that my memorandum to Mr. Singh and Mr. Gama was about the incorrect specification of these locomotives or their technical incompatibility, and that they were not suitable, that the 95 was not a suitable locomotive. I got to hear through emails from my technical colleagues that on the 18th of February, Mr. Case, who was then a project director, capital program in Freight Rail, had emailed that the 100 heavy haul coal line locomotives had been approved. Apologies. And that a specification was required for tendering purposes. The 20E specification, that was the specification for the locomotives, the 95 locomotives from CSR, was to be used, which was, and forgive me, a BOBO, a technical comment, to a 4-axle locomotive, and various adjustments were detailed. The specification was required by the evening of the 19th of February. The urgency of this is in Annexure 15. On the 20th of February,
I'm sorry, who was somebody being asked to do the specification?
Correct.
Was it you?
No, not me.
It was not you, but somebody was being asked to do it.
Somebody was being asked to prepare the specification.
Yes, okay.
Because I was close by, my technical colleagues
Yes.
kept me informed of this.
Yes.
We have to redo the specification.
Okay.
If I may just quickly ask a question, do you have the actual annexure before you? It is at page
Annexure
269.
15, which is
269.
page 269.
Now, at the second line of that email and the second sentence, it reads, and I quote, "It was decided that the 20E specification be used for a BOBO locomotive with the following adjustments, addendums." And I will go to item 3 under that statement. Axle loads be limited to a maximum of 26 ton per axle. Do you know who took the decision to use 20A? I see that you are copied in this mail
Yes.
by Mr. Case. Do you know when Mr. Case says it was decided that 20E specification be used, whose decision that was?
I do not know whose decision it was per se at an individual level. At a group level, or at a collective level, it would have been this technical team, but the decision makes sense, or I concur with this decision, because the only locomotive we had from CSR was the 95. So to get a locomotive from CSR suitable for the coal line, one had two options. You either now go through a total brand new development of a new locomotive, or you take their existing locomotive and you say, well, how can we now redesign this, modify it to make it suitable for what it was intended to be, for the type that we wanted for the coal line. And this was then the essence of this email. What do we have to do to that 95, those 95 locomotives, or that type, that 20E type, to make it suitable for the coal line?
And based on what I think what you testified to earlier, 20E locomotives was a 22 ton.
Was a 22 ton per axle, yes.
And for coal haulage, you needed a 26 ton.
Correct.
So if one looks below the items 1 to 4, where it states, and I quote, "In effect, this will imply that the present 20E will be ballasted for increased tractive effort."
Yes.
Okay, before I offer my understanding, let me ask for yours. What does that mean?
What that means is they were going to take the 20E locomotive, which is 22 tons per axle, and they were going to add a lot of steel to it to make it heavier. That's what they were going to do. They were then going to strengthen the couplers, strengthen the suspension because they're adding all the steel to it. They were going to take the traction motors and they were going to increase the power of the traction motors. The control system, effectively the driving system, would remain largely unaltered. They would change the couplers of the locomotives. The couplers of the locomotives is that part at the front and rear of the locomotives, particularly the rear where it hauls the wagons, now needs to be strengthened because of the greater power, because of the longer trains. These are the modifications which would be required for the locomotive, of which the main one, though, add this whole lot of steel, change the suspension, change the transformer because it now has to take in more power from the overhead catenary, and increase the power of the traction motor. So effectively, you're going through a fairly major exercise on this locomotive. This is what they had to do to the 20E locomotive from CSR now to make it suitable for coal line operation.
And that change...
I'm sorry, before
Yes.
that, was that an attempt to address one of the concerns you had made in your email?
It addressed those exact concerns of my email.
But whether or not it's successfully addressed, it might be another question, but it was intended to address one of them.
Yes.
Okay.
So now you will end up with a 26-ton heavy haul locomotive,
Correct.
one with these specifications. And on your paragraph 55, you say the email that came to you is dated the 18th, and these specifications and adjustments had to be effected and be ready for the 19th of February. Last line of your page 55.
Last line, page 55.
Paragraph 55.
Yes,
apologies.
specification was required by the evening of 19th February, correct.
Okay. Then we are on to the 20th on paragraph 56. What happens next?
Well, on the 20th, Mr. Harris, another technical colleague, emailed Mr. Gianni, emailed the updated specifications for coal line locomotives. When he emailed that and copied that to me, attached was a letter of interest, because attached was a letter indicated that on the 19th of February, at a meeting attended by Mr. Gianni and Ms. Medlecci and representatives of CSR, the technical personnel of Freight Rail responsible for locomotive specifications, they discussed these changes that were required to the 20E locomotive to make it compatible. What I thought rather strange at the time was that here was our technical team with the supply chain officer, representatives from the supply chain officer, and the technical personnel now discussing the technical changes required to these locomotives. The reason for that concern was that CSR, as I will address in a moment, had not yet been formally invited to submit a proposal for the locomotives.
So, if I may, and,
Yeah.
and you reference Annexure 16, which appears at page 272, in this regard. The concern you have is Mr. Case and his team are requested to consider the 20E specification, make the necessary changes
Yes.
to bring it to the level of a 19E.
Yes.
That is a 26-ton haulage capacity, and to provide that by the 19th of February.
Correct.
And at your Annexure 16 is a letter addressed to Mr. Case. It's dated the 19th of February.
The 19th of February, yes, and it's from Mr. Pavett.
And this is a letter from Mr. Pavett.
Yes.
Now, unfortunately, although the email can tell us when it was received. This letter, as currently stands, doesn't tell us what time on the 19th of February this was generated and received.
I do have that email, and it was and it is available. I must admit I did not include that one, but yes, it is available.
Okay. My question is whether Mr. Case had been successful in providing the specification for this new locomotive by the evening of 19th February, when, or whether when this discussion was had, that work was still underway.
Yes, it was, because there is the email from Mr. Case to Mr. Gianni with the updated specification. Okay. I did not put that one in here, but that email exists, which shows that the specification was revised and sent to Mr. Gianni on the 20th of, I believe, the 20th of February.
And I see at your annexure 16, midway the document, and I think you referred to this issue, it reads, the heading of the document is Requirements and Revised Specification for an Additional 100 Dual Voltage Locomotives. Midway that document, before the bullet points, there is a statement, quote, the main requirements were discussed with CSR in the presence of Mr. Tamsan Ngajiyani and Ms. Lindy Wemdleche, end of quote.
Correct.
Now, you mentioned that at least on the 19th of February, CSR had not yet been informed that a tender should be issued confined to CSR.
Correct.
And on the 19th, CSR is part of a discussion around specification of a tender to be issued.
Correct.
Do you know when the actual RFP went out to confine this acquisition to CSR?
Yes, the RFP went out, and the memorandum signed by Mr. Malefi, which is not part of this, was dated the 26th of February, asking CSR to please submit a proposal for 100 electric locomotives, essentially around, and it quotes this discussion and these changes, and it asks for that proposal to be returned by the it went out on the 26th, and I believe the return date was the 28th of February.
So CSR was part of designing the specification on which they'll tender?
Correct.
Thank you.
Before they were informed that they were to be awarded, yes, or asked to submit a proposal on a confined inquiry.
But where you are dealing with a tender that is to be confined to one entity, does it make any difference that they get to know about, or they get to know about the specification before they are informed, where in the end they are the only ones anyway who will be involved in the tender?
Perhaps in the substance, Mr. Chair, it makes no difference. Perhaps but in the procedural aspect,
yes,
it's my understanding that it does make a difference.
Yes.
Because what this would imply, my reading of this, is that communications with a supplier, even on this nature, would take place only when they had been officially informed through the appropriate channels, which would be the letter from whichever delegated authority, in this case Mr. Malefe, given the value of the transaction, to the supplier to say, we are asking you for a proposal. Please develop a proposal. Then the discussions and engagements around the technical issues would take place for the proposal to be returned. It is not possible for a supplier to develop a proposal for 100 locomotives, priced proposal. Bear in mind that there are many things which go into developing a proposal for a 3.8 billion transaction. One doesn't do that in 3 days, which was the date of.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's a different point.
Yeah.
That's a different point. You see, it certainly would be unacceptable if for them to have been included in designing the specification if it was going to be an open tender. That's for sure.
Yes.
I'm just wondering where already a decision has been taken that a particular entity is the only entity to which the tender would be confined, whether they know before they know the specification before they are formally told, or whether they know it after, whether it makes any difference. I'm thinking aloud. I'm not sure. I'm just testing.
It is a
what
moot
is
point.
strange about it.
It is a moot point, Mr. Chair. As you say, in that sense, that does matter, but my understanding
Yeah.
of the policies and procedures manual is we have approval to confine, and you grant me there is we have approval to confine. I cannot discuss with the supplier the details of what he is to supply because we do not have that letter. He does not have that letter. I do not have that letter of authority to talk to him yet. That comes once he's been informed, requested for a proposal per that signature. Till he has that letter, till that letter has formally been issued to the supplier, that letter can be withdrawn at any time, procedurally. Therefore, any discussions which we may have, and I may be giving a potential supplier through these discussions a false and an incorrect impression, I may be, of a letter to come, which might not come. The fact that in this case it was coming is a moot, but that is the moot point about it. Procedurally, the supplier should have been, I contend, should have been in possession of the letter requesting the quotation or a proposal. Then one goes through the detailed technical discussions of the proposal. Then the supplier submits his quotation.
You see, maybe the point should be that they should not be involved in the designing of the specification at all, whether it's before or after they've received official notification. What do you say? So I was focusing on the question of what's the significance of saying they shouldn't get involved in the designing of the specification before they receive the formal notification, as opposed to saying they should not get involved at all in the designing of the specification. Whether, in other words, Transnet shouldn't design the specification without them and then present the confined tender to them with a specification and see whether they are able to come up with something that would meet that specification.
I would concur that procedurally that would be a more correct approach. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
If I can then just continue on that. Have you seen the RFP for this confinement?
Yes, I have.
To your recollection, what does the RFP invite CSR to do?
It invites CSR to please submit a proposal by XYZ date, and if I recall correctly, it was the 28th, and it said, and it lists it says based on the revised specification which was developed here, the revised specification which was developed in terms of this request to Mr. Case. And it says these essentially should incorporate all the modifications currently made to the 19E that have previously been discussed, but here are the essential components to it.
So if I'm to understand the process, and I'm going to try to put it in a simplistic manner as possible for my own benefit. Technically, what happened here was the decision was to go buy 100 electric locomotives from CSR. And we know from the proposal that what we are seeking to acquire, CSR does not have.
Correct.
We then decide we are going to do this by way of confinement.
Yes.
We then take a decision that we are going to take the CSR 20E locomotive, and we identify adjustments that are required on that locomotive.
Yes.
To bring it on par with 19E.
Yes.
In order to do so, we go have a discussion with CSR as to what they will need to do to bring it up to 19E.
Correct.
Then we issue an RFP for them to give us a proposal on that which we have jointly discussed.
That's exactly what happened.
That's the process.
Yes.
I guess, Chair, it would be a matter for argument whether that was proper or not.
Yes, no, that's true, but sometimes it's helpful to get the perspectives of people who have been involved on the ground on some of these matters. Let me say this. If the decision had not been taken that the tender would be confined to CSR, certainly any discussion with them in regard to the specification would be improper, because they could influence the specification to be formulated in such a way as to favor them if and when an open tender was made and they put in a bid.
Yes.
That's the one scenario.
Yes.
Now, if the decision has already been taken that they are the entity that would be given this confined tender, I'm not sure in what way Transnet would be prejudiced by a discussion with them in regard to the specification, because they are the ones who have already been chosen. And let's assume, for argument's sake, that choosing them was the correct decision. Because otherwise, normally if you were running your own company, once you had decided that that's the company that's going to assist me with this business requirement, there would be nothing wrong in talking to them to say, this is what I need, can you deliver? And then they can say to you, yes, we can deliver, we deliver this all the time. Or they might say, we can deliver A, B, C, D, but we can't deliver E and F. And then you start talking to them about what an alternative might be before maybe you formally request them. You might have some discussion with them, even if it's informal. We are now dealing with a public entity. I'm trying to see whether it becomes wrong simply because it's a public entity or not. Where you have already decided this is the one that we are going to ask to, this is the company that will ask to help us.
The mindset, the framework I have in my mind, Mr. Chairman, from my years in the organization is, and if I may quote the example, if the decision has been taken and the letter to the firm has to be issued by yourself as the chair of the firm, before that letter is issued, I go and have a discussion with the supplier. You would be at right to say, what do you think you are doing? Who gave you permission and authority to go and have those discussions with the supplier before I have formally communicated with them. That would be, in terms of that is absolutely my understanding of how the policies and procedures worked through the organization. If I had your permission to engage with them beforehand, that would be a different story. I have not assessed that.
Yes.
It is quite possible that if I had those discussions with the supplier, without your permission, you could come and say to me, who said you could talk to the supplier? Because maybe I'm going to change my mind about that supplier, and now you have compromised me in the firm. It is in that context that I offer that it is
thank you.
out of context.
Yeah, thank you.
And in the context of your response to the chair right now, we will have to determine whether this meeting of the 19th of February taking place with CSR was after the board had approved the confinement to CSR. That's something we will have to investigate for ourselves.
I would take it that it was, because we had the BADC meeting on the 24th, the board meeting immediately following, so this was after the 19th.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
That is not a point. The only point I make is that it had not been formally communicated through the chair, so it was a communication prior to the...
to CSR. To CSR.
To CSR,
Yeah.
yes.
This meeting regarding specification is on the 19th of February 2014.
Yes.
Do you know when CSR submitted its proposal on the 100 locos?
Yes, on the 28th of February, 2014.
A week later. A week later, about from
19th,
the meeting is on the 19th of February, they submit 28th.
28th,
28th,
yeah,
okay.
give or take a week later.
The next date you then deal with in the sequence of events is at paragraph 60 on page 14 of your statement.
Yes.
Can you deal with the issues that you set out therein?
Sure. May I just touch on 59, because we have not touched 59, if I may just refer back to that.
Absolutely.
To close
Yes,
it.
yes, please.
As a
Go
result
ahead.
of these design changes to the locomotive, a new class for the 100 locomotives was created for CSR. That was 21E. That clearly differentiates, which says it's a different design, it's a different type of locomotive, it's a different animal. And that was the upshot of all the design changes which had taken place earlier.
Okay.
Okay.
We are now at your paragraph 60.
60, yes. Nothing much happened, and if I may say, life carries on pretty much as before.
Okay, thank you.
When myself and colleagues received a mail from Mr. Yusuf Leher in finance with spreadsheets of the final cash flows at the 17th of March 2014. These spreadsheets gave the cash flows of the 4 successful bidders in the 1064 project, plus the CSR 100 locomotives, plus GE the 60 diesel locomotives. What I noticed particularly about this email was that the advance payments to CSR for the 100 locomotives was a 30% down payment on the design review, and may I please take you here to Annexure 17,
At page 276.
page 276.
And at 276, you say that is a spreadsheet received from Mr. Yusuf Laher as per page 275.
Correct.
Yes.
And this is part of the spreadsheet showing the milestone percentages. It's not the complete spreadsheet.
Okay?
It's an extract from the spreadsheet. And if one looks at the top right-hand corner, we'll see the APG 30%, that's advanced payment guarantee, design review 30%, acceptance 37%. The implications of this is that before a single locomotive is received, one is paid 60% of the amount of the locomotive. This is, I'm not quite sure which phrase to use, unusual, way out of line with anything we have done before. That one pays 60% of a locomotive before one receives the first locomotive. And that meant that the upfront payment was 1.32 billion rand for these locomotives, the upfront payment.
Can I ask you at this stage, seeing that you had been at Transnet for some decades,
Yes.
had you been involved in other acquisitions of locomotives before?
Yes.
And if about how many kind of transactions over the period, for example, 2, 3, 4?
I was involved specifically in the acquisition of the 15E locomotives for the ore line, which also was a confinement on Mitsui and the upfront payments for that. 43 locomotives from General Electric.
Maybe you can mention the years if you remember when each one was.
The 15E was around 2010, and please
Yes.
don't hold me too closely to the years, but it was about
Yes.
2010 because the
Yes.
Mitsui factory was running. The Class 43 was around about the same time, 2010, 2011. Then we had the specification for the Class 95, which was an open tender one, and I was party to that business case as well. That was 2013, also about 2011 of that order. So
So you had been involved in about, what, 4 or so
that's certainly
transactions?
3 of them.
3 of them. And of all of them, you say this was the biggest or highest upfront payment in terms of percentage of the whole price.
There is one other that exceeds that for a special reason, but yes, this was way out of line to anything which we had
Yes. Okay.
proposed before.
Okay.
Just my context, and we will, if I may, for reference point, and we will come to that in the 1064. The standard normal upfront payment that we posited was a 3 million deposit to enable the supplier to set up his production run and factory, and then we would pay perhaps 90% on the acceptance of the locomotive, and there would then be 5% retention and another 5% warranty payable at the end. So the 1064 business case for the 106 for the 599 for the diesels and the electrics both posited an upfront deposit of only 300 million.
Okay. Thank you.
And those points you make at paragraph 61, where you conduct this comparison to previous purchases.
Yes, yes. In Mars, we had paid, the upfront payment was approximately 7.8%. The advance payment to CSR for the 9520E was 10%. The upfront payment for the 1064 business case was a setup fee of 300 million, posited in the tender.
So where you state the Mars upfront payment for the 110 19E locomotives was approximately 7.8%, do you recall what were the timelines for the payment of the balance of the purchase price?
It would have been on delivery of the locomotive.
And on that principle as well, when CSR, in respect of the 9520E, received 10%, the remainder, excluding retention and warranties, of course, would be on delivery.
It is I would like to confirm that one, but it's my recollection that that is so, that we pay 10% and the balance on delivery. I would just like to confirm that point.
And in respect of the 100 locos we are dealing with now, 60% was paid before a single locomotive was delivered.
Correct.
You have at your annexure 17 a figure of 4.4 billion.
Yes.
Can you explain what that figure is relative to the approved acquisition cost of 3.87 billion, if memory serves me well?
Right.
do you know what those
sorry,
figures are?
I'm on 62. Sorry. Paragraph 62.
No. At your Annexure 17,
Annexure 17.
page 276,
Yes.
just past the midway point at the top of that document is a rent value of 4.4 billion.
Yes.
I would like you to talk to that.
Oh, apologies. That 4.4 billion was then the what was seen as what was the total estimated cost of that project for the acquisition of the 100 locomotives. That was an increase from the 3.8 billion that was posited in the original business case memorandum. Here, the cash flow goes up to 4.4 million, which was later increased when the submission for this was tabled. It went up to 4.8 billion. But that was the cash flow at the time for the delivery, 4.4 billion, which excluded some variations.
Okay. So, according to page 276, 1.32 billion was paid on the 1st of April 2014.
Correct. Or on or before the 1st of April.
On or before. As at this date, do you know whether the new specification, the new design for this locomotive had been approved? No, not approved, had been completed.
No, it hadn't been. The design review for and it's not in my statement, the design review for this 100 locomotive was completed around towards the end of July 2014, because that triggered the second payment, also of 1.32 billion, which was paid on the 1st of October 2014.
Making a total of
2 billion.
3.2,
Oh, sorry,
no, 2.6 billion
2.6 billion.
paid over a period of 6 months.
Correct.
Thank you. Overleaf at page 15, starting from your paragraph 62. You deal with these payments and issues around that. Would you briefly like to talk to that? From paragraph 62 at page 15. Is there anything we omitted at page 14?
No, page 14 is fine.
Okay.
Page 62 just illustrates the sentiment between my colleagues in finance and myself at that time around the locomotive tenders. The reason this email came, or this SMS came to me from my colleagues in finance, is because I was putting into the capital budget the cash flows that were required to finance all these locomotive transactions, not only in the capital acquisition, but together with their maintenance and also for the wagons. So I was compiling the 7-year budget spread for that, and I had to ensure that these figures appeared correctly in the budget. But this was the interesting one from my colleague, Ms. Natasha McMahon, who on the 27th of February 2014, bear in mind this is now in the middle of the tender negotiation period on the 1064, and we are also at the same time now as we are starting to deal with the 100. And her email reads, and this is from Natasha, quote, Mr. C, work in 4 billion, yes, 4 billion deposit in the current financial year in all scenarios. This is now on the 27th of February, and this is a 4 billion deposit which we now have to pay before the end of the 2014, sorry, in the current financial year for all scenarios. I replied to that, yes, 4 billion, my giddy hat, what will the auditors say? I must confess, I was, she said, we've asked for an opinion, these guys are cowboys. This is Natasha. I responded at that time, and I've just completed the ethics survey. I didn't know what else to say. We had a laugh, and we just said, wow, this is going to cause us grief. But yes, that was the sentiment at the time around these significant upfront deposits that we were going to be in line to pay.
And at paragraph 63, you speak of total upfront costs of 7.37 billion.
Yes.
Payable before the 1st of April 2014.
Yes. The upfront deposit payments for the 1064 locomotives, again, I will address those, plus for the 121E locomotives from CSR, plus the 60 diesels, required that from the time of signing those contracts on the 17th of March to the 1st of April, we had to find and pay 7.37 billion in upfront costs. And I just put that this was put an incredible strain on the organization and the capital that had to be raised in this short period of time. One does not raise this capital overnight.
And how this 7.7 billion is spread across the different transactions, you capture that at your Annexure 17.
Correct.
At page 277. 17 starts at 274, but if you could have regard to page 277.
My apologies, I'm not sure that Annexure 17 is correctly referenced.
Please have regard to page 277.
277? 277, thank you.
That's part of Annexure 17.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Page 277 is again a further extract of that same file that I received on the 17th of March, which was the day that the locomotive transactions were all finalized. And in the top left-hand corner, you'll see it's a copy of the cash flow final 17th of March, total cash flow across all the locomotives. It also gives the total prices to be paid, but the key figure is total cash flows, 1064 locomotives, 100 locomotives. The first line, 31st of March 14. If one moves there to the first yellow column on the right-hand side, it is 7.37 billion rand, and that is what we had to pay between the 17th of March and the 31st of March.
And that 7.3 billion is made up with the following?
That is made up of 4.8 billion for across the 4 OEMs for the 160,000 for the 1064 locomotives, 1.32 billion the upfront payment for CSR. That was their first 30% upfront payment.
And this is the current transaction we're dealing with?
That's the current transaction we're dealing with.
Yes.
And there was a 1.2 billion for 60 locomotives for General Electric.
Was a reason given to you, or did you become aware of one, on why such a significant upfront payment should be made in respect of these transactions?
Not in respect of the 100. There was I would like to deal with the 1064 when we actually deal with the 1064 locomotives, because it is more relevant there. There was a reason given for this very large upfront payment for the 60 locomotives to General Electric, because that was and I understand, and please, I have not seen any official documentation to this, but it was the talk from those who were involved, that it was because the production line was running, this was to achieve an extremely favorable price for those locomotives, and it was to buy the material for the 60 locomotives upfront and get it in, so that the line was just kept running without having to close down the line or stop or start the line, and it enabled those locomotives to be delivered very quickly with no break in production. That's my understanding of the high upfront payment there to General Electric.
You state at your paragraph 63 at page 15, in regard to this upfront cost payment of 7.37 billion, that, and I quote from your statement, Transnet had to pay upfront cost of 7.37 billion before the 1st of April 2014, so that the payments would be reflected in the 2013-2014 financial year.
Correct.
And in this regard, you refer to Annexure 17, which is the document we have just worked through.
Correct.
What was so important in effecting these payments in the 2013-2014 year? Why couldn't some payments roll over to the next financial year? Why was it necessary to effect that 7.3 in that particular financial year? Are you aware?
I can reverse engineer the answer at the moment, but let me not say I was not given the, I would rather not go definitively down that route.
Okay.
But it would have had to do with the cash flow across the organization, how it is presented in the various years, because if this had moved to the next year with the other upfront payments, it would have been a really significant spike in the payments of that year, which would have affected the borrowings of that year, as I will show later. But may I say that is, I've reversed engineered that solution.
Yes, yes. Chair, before I address you, Chair, Mr. Cullen, you conclude by saying that this significant payment put an incredible strain on the organization, as this capital had to be raised in an extremely short period of time.
Yes.
Was it actually raised in that time?
Well, yes, because the payments were made.
Okay. At 64, you start the part of your testimony that deals with the increase in the estimated total cost of acquisition of the 100 locomotives from 3.8 billion to 4.8 billion. You see that?
Yes.
Chair, if I may at this juncture address you, that is a fairly involved that's fairly involved testimony. We will not finish it today,
no.
If Mr. Khaled is to work through it, or if we had to go till 4:30. I don't know where, it's 15:53. I don't know how the chair, we could start, we would have to stop it midway, which means when we reconvene, we have to go back in order to be properly contextualized. And I know, Chair, I had committed to 4:30, and you had thankfully asked me whether I am fine with it. I had said yes. I will not accept that as a deliberate attempt to mislead the Chair, but to say perhaps I was over-enthusiastic in my response. I don't know about Mr. Khaled. I hear him making certain errors, and I don't know if he's becoming tired. But I shall speak for myself for now.
Well, I'll hear whether Mr. Khaled feels that he can still deal with it. I would imagine that what you mean when you say if we start with it and we have to stop without finishing,
yes,
that chapter or theme, when you say we would have to come back to it on Monday, I assume that you don't mean that we'll have to start all over again, but that all you mean is we might need to spend maybe another 5 minutes to refresh our memory before we continue. Is that what you mean, or do you mean that we would have to start all over again?
If the Chair were to have regard to paragraph, starting at 64.
Sorry?
Starting at paragraph 64 at page 15.
Yes.
Working through to 72.
Yeah.
It's one continuous narrative that is best told through reference to tables and calculations.
Yes.
And if we start it, it
Yeah.
would be best to complete it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, when we try to pick it up again,
It
you know,
might be problematic.
now if to cover the 10 minutes that before 4 now, I would be in a position to start at 9 o'clock if there's a concern about losing time.
Assuming we were not going to start at 9 o'clock anyway.
Then I'm in a position to start at 8:30, Chair.
Mr. Callard, how are you feeling? Are you feeling still fine to proceed?
Good to go for another half hour, Mr. Chair.
Sorry?
Good to go for another half hour.
It's good to go for another half hour.
Yeah.
Mr. Lowe, you had. or you are tired.
I am tired, Chair. And it's because, as the Chair is aware, it's been quite a few days working with Mr. Callard to prepare him for today. So it's not like I'm coming in cold on these issues.
Okay.
It's accumulated exhaustion.
I think, Mr. Callard, we will have to be merciful to the younger generation.
Both of us. I must,
indebted.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'm also grateful.
I'd appreciate it.
And
Thank
then
you, Chair.
would it be fine if we then start at 9
I'm in a
on
position
Monday?
to.
Yes.
Would that be fine?
Yes.
That
We,
would be
we
fine.
met earlier
Okay.
today to come
Yes.
through here, and I think it was comfortable for Mr. Callard to come
Yes.
through that early.
Yes.
So
Okay.
9 should suit us, Chair.
Would be okay, all right.
Thank you.
Then we will stop here then for today and adjourn until Monday at 9 o'clock. So we'll adjourn for today, and on Monday we'll start at 9 o'clock.
I'm indebted.
We adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you.